So today we are not looking at aircraft, we are looking at engines. I apologize for the echo. I'm in a room attached to the hangar. So there'll be a bit more of an echo in here, and I do apologize for that. So to start with, we're looking here at what the trolley says, a Pratt Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine. So 18-cylinder air-cooled engine. It was the United States' first 18-cylinder radial engine, introduced in 1939, and at the time averaged around 2,000 horsepower, which was significantly more than other air-cooled engines of the time. At the time, not even liquid-cooled engines could match the R2800's power, such as the early versions of the Rolls-Royce V12 supercharged Merlin, seen on aircraft such as the Spitfire. During the course of World War II, the R2800s, I apologize for the camera angles. During the course of World War II, the R2800s powered a variety of fighter and bomber aircraft, particularly all of the American aircraft, including but not limited to the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the Grumman F-6F, F-7F, and F-8F aircraft, the F-4U Corsair, the P-61 Black Widow, and the Martin B-26 Marauder. After the war, it powered a variety of transport aircraft such as the Douglas DC-6. This engine, however, is off a Curtiss C-46 Commando. The R2800s were manufactured right up until 1960, and they put out eventually anywhere from 2,400 horsepower, and with water injection could put up to 3,400 horsepower. This particular engine is, by my understanding, a B series engine built by Ford, producing about 2,200 horsepower. As I mentioned, it's an 18-cylinder, and each cylinder has to have 2 spark plugs for redundancy system, so that's 36 spark plugs. So imagine having to do a spark change on that, or even valve timing. And here you have a GE provided, I believe this is one of the 2 magnetos, which is the system that provides the spark. If I'm incorrect with that, please let me know in the comments. There's your 2 banks of cylinders, the exhaust, and your supercharger would sit somewhere in the back of the engine there. I don't know exactly where, but it would be in amongst those components in there. Moving on to the next engine, I apologize for the flickering light. The next engine is, as you can see, in several pieces. This is a de Havilland Gypsy Queen, an inverted 6-cylinder, effectively an upgrade to the de Havilland Gypsy Major, which is an inverted 4-cylinder. This, I think, is a little bit further down the line, but anyway. The story with this engine is, if I remember correctly, it came off of a New Zealand Air Force de Havilland Dove, and a bunch of air cadets got together and stripped this engine down to its bare parts, and were in the process of rebuilding it. And a bunch of pilots came to them and said, you guys have done so well, we will teach you how to fly. And they left the engine as it was back then, and that was maybe, I'm not sure, 5 or 6 years ago. Since then, the engine, some pieces have been put back together, but there is a hope that maybe one day it'll be put back together, either in a static state or maybe even a state to run. Who knows? I guess only time will tell. But as you can see, there's bits and bobs of it all over the place. All various components scattered all across this room. The next engine I'm going to talk about here is, as the board suggests, is the Allison V1710 liquid-cooled V12 piston engine, developed in around 1929 by the Allison Company, which, if I remember correctly, is a subsidiary of General Motors. It powered a few aircraft, one of them being the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk, Tomahawk, or Kitty Hawk, depending on where you are and where they're from, that being one of them there. These engines were a very versatile, very powerful engine. It did very well for what they could do. They could do very well for what they were intended to do. However, some variants had a single-stage supercharger, which at low altitudes worked wonderfully. However, once they got beyond around 15,000 feet, they started to struggle to maintain power output. And so another aircraft that the Allison engines were used on were the early P-51 Mustang models. And as I mentioned, they struggled above 15,000 feet. And so North American went to the North American Aircraft Company, courtesy of a agreement, I think, between the States and the UK, went to the RAF and said, hey, we can see that your Spitfire aircraft do pretty well above 15,000 feet. Could we perhaps maybe borrow one of your Rolls-Royce Merlin aircraft and put it on our Mustang, one of our Mustang aircraft, to see how it performs? And courtesy of that agreement, that happened, and the North American Aircraft Company, or corporation, whatever they're called, my apologies, said, wow, this is a lot better than what we had previously. Yeah, we're going to mass produce these engines in large numbers under license. And they went to the Packard Car Company and said, hey, can you build us these engines? And lo and behold, the P-51 Mustang was born. To give you an idea, the Mustang could perform a little bit better than the Spitfire. Again, if I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. Although what I do know is that it had one of, if not the largest range distance it could fly of the World War II Allied fighters. I don't remember where I saw it, but if I remember correctly, with external fuel tanks, the Mustang could fly from London to northern Italy, which for the time was a lot further for any other fighter. It meant that they could meet the bombers and escort them a lot further than all the other fighters could do. I'm supposed to be talking about the Allison engine, and here I am going off about Mustangs. And they're related, aren't they? But yeah, just thought I'd let you know about that. And now we move on to the Rolls-Royce Dart, which, if I remember correctly, was one of, if not the first turboprop engines in the world. If you're wondering what a turboprop is, it's basically a jet engine with a propeller attached to a gearbox to the front of it. The Rolls-Royce Darts were eventually the most significant turboprop engine of their time. They could produce anywhere from, I gotta get this right now. I can't remember the lower number, but could produce upwards of a little over 3,100 shaft horsepower. How that differs from normal horsepower, I'm not sure. If you know, feel free to let me know in the comments. It was also considered one of, if not the first mass-produced turboprop engine. Again, total number, I can't tell you off the top of my head. If you know it, please do let me know. As you can see there in the back there, those are known as can combustors. So the air and fuel, once the air is compressed, it meets up here in the cans with the fuel and it gets ignited and then gets shot out the back through the turbine. The Rolls-Royce Darts were characterized by a very high-pitched squeal, if you want to call it. I'm going to say what I think it's produced by. I need to do a bit of research on this, but if you think it's incorrect, please do let me know. And if you want to correct me, feel free to do so. I would assume it's produced by the high pressure turbine. You know, I can't tell you exactly what it's produced by, but it's because whatever it is, it's spinning at such a high speed, it's creating that high pitched squeal. Now the F-37, the Rolls-Royce Darts were used on a number of aircraft, but primarily on aircraft such as the Fokker F-27 and the Vickers Viscount used them. A lot of turboprop aircraft from the 1960s used this engine, as it was basically the primary engine, turboprop engine, at the time. I don't think they were, but this was the primary mass-produced engine. And now to move on to the first jet engine we have on display here at the New Zealand Warbirds Association. Although it doesn't really look like it, I mean, I don't blame you, this is only one part of it. This is what could be dubbed as the cold section. This is the cold section of the de Havilland Goblin engine, which was de Havilland's entry in the race to develop a viable engine from Frank Whittle's first jet engine design. Development began during World War II in 1941 on a centrifugal design that would later become known as the de Havilland Goblin. So I say centrifugal, that's the compressor. So that massive black thing houses the impeller. Think like on a turbocharger, your impeller spins and creates centrifugal forces that draws in air through there, and on the other side draws in the air. It gets then compressed and shot out to the sides. When you'll have your can combustors will sit, here and here, and on each individual holes, where the air and fuel mixture would then, meet and get combusted, and then go out to the back here, where they then be providing the spinning force for the turbine, which is connected to there, which then spins your impeller for the compressor, and then the hot exhaust then gets expelled out the exhaust out the side there. So, it's interesting to think that jet engines started out looking something similar to this, to what you see today in the turbofans, which we do have one on display. I'll show you in a little bit, but beforehand, we have the Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire. This is the next engine I want to talk to you about. I don't know a lot about it, but I know that it's a British turbojet engine. It was produced by the company Armstrong Siddeley in the 1950s. It was developed to be used on one of the RAF's V bombers. Off the top of my head, I can't tell you which one, being either the Vulcan, Valiant, or the Victor. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I want to say the Victor, but if you know in the comments, please do let me know. But it was used on other aircraft, such as the early versions of the Hawker Hunter, and on the Gloucester Javelin, also used these engines. And you can see how design, changed from your centrifugal early engines like the Rolls-Royce Goblin to get something that's more seen very similar today. So here, you'll have your intake, then you can get your compressor section, then you get to the combustion section, and this is what I would call, or what is rather known as, a axial flow. So air would, come in there, get compressed, meet here. Instead of being in a can, it would be in one large area around the engine where you'd have fuel injectors and igniters. It would, then be ignited and then, shot out of the exhaust. Also in this room we have old navigation and radio equipment, and as you see, majority of them are in black boxes. And modern times aircraft have what's called black boxes, and they record the cockpit. They include the cockpit voice recorder, which records cockpit discussions and noises, and the flight data recorder, which records aircraft parameters mostly. And they're called black boxes these days, even though despite the fact when you look them up they're orange. That's just so they can be seen. But they're called black boxes to pay homage to these pieces of equipment that were in black boxes that did the exact same thing. They helped navigate, they helped communicate, and they helped tell the pilot different parameters of the aircraft. Isn't that interesting? As well as engines and black boxes, we have a variety of other engine and aircraft components, such as a few guns that will no longer work, various other engine components, what appears to be a throttle body, an exhaust, crankcase. Now, for you car enthusiasts, that looks like I don't know what the light's doing, but I do apologize about that. That looks like a turbocharger, but in aviation terms, that would technically be a supercharger. We have a few pistons, some conrods, the master crank for radial engine. I believe that could be a sleeve valve system. I could be wrong. Feel free to let me know in the comments. So the next engine, I'm back outside the hangar, outside the room in the hangar. The next engine I'm here to look at is the Rolls-Royce Avon, which was Rolls-Royce's first, and subsequently Britain's first axial flow jet engine. It is what I would, and what many would consider a pure jet, or a turbojet. Everything goes in the front, and it comes out the back. So the principles still stay the same, you know, with engines, be it a jet or a piston engine. It's particularly if it's a four-stroke. You have your intake, your suck, your compression, the squeeze, combustion, the bang, and the exhaust, the blow. And it's interesting to see how, you know, in the span of about 10 years, the jet engine had developed, especially when you look at the Rolls-Royce Goblin, which was first developed in 1941, to something like this, the Rolls-Royce Avon, which was introduced in the 1950s. You know, in the span of 10 years, it's quite something how things can change and develop. Let's come around the front here. You can see the intake side of the engine. So here are your inlet, I believe these are inlet guide vanes, but it looks like they could be variable as well. I'm not 100% certain on that, but behind them would be your effectively your fan, you know, the first stage of your low pressure section. Now come around to the combustion section. You have what's called, again, these are cans, you know, your can combustions, but this is what's known as can annular. How that differs from can combustion is cans have individual, how do I put this? Individual intakes, what way to put it. Look at the Goblin where it has one hole for each can. But with can annular, they share a common, one way to put it, intake, and then they branch off into their own cans where they, you know, have the fuel and air mixed, and they get combusted, and they meet up again in the exhaust sections and the turbines and everything, and then just gets shot out the back. The Avons were used on aircraft such as the English Electric Lightning and the English Electric Canberra, which we looked at in a previous video. They produced upwards of about 13,000 pounds of thrust. It all depended on the variant, which, when you think about it, isn't really a lot, but for the time, it certainly was a decent amount, seeing as engines these days can produce over 100,000 pounds of thrust. Now, the last engine we'll be looking at today is the CFM International CFM 56, which is most likely one of, if not the highest produced jet engines in the world and most widely used. Now, this is what's known as a turbofan engine. As you can see, it's got a much larger fan at the front when compared to the rest of the engine. It definitely wasn't the first produced, but it, as I said, is most likely the most mass-produced. Now, apologies if I sound a little out of breath. It is rather warm in these hangars. It's hot and humid. So as I said, so this is the fan, this is the fan of the turbofan part. Now, the reason why, you know, they call it a turbofan is because the turbofan engines produced a lot more thrust than your pure jet engines. Now, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's something like 70% of the air gets bypassed the engine, being it comes out of here and, you know, bypasses the engine. And so, you know, the bypass not only provides more, if not extra thrust, it also helps in the cooling of the engine. You know, you have all that air getting, you know, shot across all of this, and you know, it's the same principle as any other engine. Like I said, with the Rolls-Royce Avon, it's your intake, your compression, your combustion, and your exhaust. It's just this engine came out in the I have to get this right now, and it was developed in the 1970s. And so it's interesting to think that in the span of 20 years from the Rolls-Royce Avon to the CFM 56, how things developed. And as I said, this wasn't the first turbofan engine. That would be most likely the engine used on the original C5 Galaxies. I want to say the General Electric the General Electric TF39s, but I could be wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. And so, just coming around the side here, I've always known this cone as the bazooka tube. I mean, you can sort of see why it looks a little bit like a bazooka, but hey, if you notice something else, let me know down in the comments. Now, This particular CFM56, if I understand correctly, came off a Air New Zealand 737. I don't know exactly when, but yeah. So these engines, I say, were widely used. They were used on the 737s and the Airbus A320s, the two most produced passenger aircraft in the world, as well as the KC-135 Stratotanker, the Boeing P-8 Poseidon, and a handful of other aircraft. So that's all for the engines. And I know this video is going to be much longer than all the videos on all the individual aircraft, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. If you have anything you'd like to add about any of the engines, feel free to do so. Please put it down in the comments. Other than that, feel free to like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.